Hello and welcome back to the Rory Talks Football channel, your daily Arsenal news updates, debates and my opinions. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe. It really helps me out. We're trying to get to 6,000 subscribers. Smash a like on the video as well if you enjoy it. Today, it's a tough one. It's a video that I've thought about whether I actually wanted to make because it's painful. It genuinely is painful, but I do think we have to talk about it. And it is Smith-Rowe, potentially Nketiah, a couple of other players we'll look at, and whether or not their time at Arsenal is up, and whether the project has moved to a stage where we need to move them on. And it is such a tough one, especially for Smith-Rowe, who I love. And if you've watched this channel for a long time, you'll know how desperate I am for him to succeed and how painful it would be to see him go. But there comes a point where you do just have to look objectively at the club, at the future, at what we want to win, what we want to achieve, and whether players like Smith-Rowe can be part of that. And look, we'll talk about it. But ultimately, we've heard that Newcastle, this was a few days ago from Sky Sports News, that Newcastle are plotting a January swoop for Emile Smith-Rowe. Now, that might be changed by the recent Tonali news and the fact that Tonali might be banned for a while. But if that's on the table, and you're talking, Arsenal supposedly want around 50 million for Smith-Rowe. I'd struggle, honestly, to see him going for more than 35 or 40 million. But if the money's on the table and you look at it objectively, I do think you have to kind of accept that moving him on might be the best thing. And we'll look at why, right? So this on the left-hand side is the Smith-Rowe that we properly fell in love with. The Smith-Rowe that we all remember. The Smith-Rowe that we think about, when we talk about keeping him and how good he could be and what a prospect he is. It's that Smith-Rowe. It's the 21-22 season Smith-Rowe, where he scored 10 goals, 2 assists, quite a lot of those off the bench, changed games, scored some wonderful goals, the dribbling, the passing, mainly off that left-hand side, competing with Martinelli. That Emile Smith-Rowe and the future that Emile Smith-Rowe had was undeniable, and you'd love to keep him at the club. But on the right-hand side is his entire Premier League career. Barely double the number of games, the majority of those off the bench. Only 2 goals. In that extra 36 games, 2 goals. And a handful of assists. And that fundamentally is the massive problem. It's that Emile Smith-Rowe is 23 years old. He's played 69 games with a return of 12 goals net assists, which isn't bad. 20 goal contributions in under 70 games is still not, it's not bad, it's not brilliant, but given that a lot of those were substitute appearances, it isn't bad. But then you take out that one season where you could argue, look, almost is he a one-season wonder? Now that he's 23 years old, it becomes a problem. And then you look at what he's done elsewhere in that time. Huddersfield and RB Leipzig. He played 3 games at RB Leipzig. He played 19 games at Huddersfield for a combined less than 1,200 minutes. Again, this is a big, big problem. You're talking about a 23-year-old, and if you compare him to the likes of Fabio Vieira, 23 years old, Kai Havertz, only 24 years old. It's where I begin to struggle with the prospect idea. Because he's at the age now where I don't think you can class him as a prospect. I don't think you can look at him and say, oh, but look at what he could become. And there are 2 reasons for that. Firstly is his age and lack of game time. As a senior player, he's played less than 5,000 senior minutes of football. For context, that's less than 55 full games of football at a senior level. At 23, that's just not enough. And when you talk about his development, where's that development coming from? This is the other problem, is that, let's say you sell him for 40 million now. People say, oh, but, he could become a 80, 100 million pound player. Like, he's that good, he's got that much potential. But is he ever going to see that potential through at Arsenal? And that's the issue. We've seen him against Brentford in the League Cup. And he was good. And I loved it. And you're watching it, desperately wanting him to shine. But since that performance, we've seen a couple of 10-minute cameo appearances elsewhere. And it's like, when's he going to get this opportunity to show that he can develop that way? Another season goes by, he's 24 pushing 25, and then you're like, where's it going to come from? And where does he get into the team? In my opinion, he's not going to play across the front three. It's going to be midfield appearances where we see him. He's not going to compete for a position on the left-hand side when we've got Martinelli and Trossard. So if you're going to see him in the midfield, well, our best midfield, in my opinion, is Partey, Rice, Ødegaard. You've then got, as a left-sided 8, which is where most people think is his long-term position, well, Fabio Vieira and Kai Havertz are both clearly ahead of him in the pecking order for that. As the right-sided 8, you've got Ødegaard, who's basically never injured and can play the majority of games, and when he doesn't play, it's Fabio Vieira, apart from that League Cup game. So when's he going to have this time to shine and develop and become, this 80, £100 million player? I don't think he is. And the way I really look at it, and when you compare it to other clubs and clubs that we want to compete with, look at Man City and the way they sold Cole Palmer in the summer for, 50 million, something like that. That's an academy player, younger than Emile Smith-Rowe, who's developed arguably more than Emile Smith-Rowe, and they sold him for 50 million. And City fans probably looked at him as a prospect that they were really excited for. But business is business, and if 35 or 40 million comes on the table for Smith-Rowe, for a player that's playing as few minutes for Arsenal as he is, I hate to say it, but I do just think you have to take it. And I think, given his lack of minutes so far this season, Smith-Rowe would probably want it too. And yes, it would be brutal to see him go to a Newcastle, or God forbid a Chelsea, and perform really well and shine for them. But it's kind of like Balogun, in the sense that you just have to let him go. So that's my feeling on Smith-Rowe, and I'd be interested to see what you think about him in the comments. And then I want to talk about Eddie. Now, Eddie is a different case because he is playing far more regularly than Emile Smith-Rowe. But the issue for me with Eddie is that there's a clear upgrade there. That is a position that there is a clear upgrade. And what we talk about is Eddie Nketiah in the Premier League in history, 16 goals and 3 assists in 97 games. Now, yes, a lot of those games will have been off the bench, but Ivan Toney in 68 games, 32 goals, 9 assists. So if you're talking about bringing in Ivan Toney to replace Eddie Nketiah, there is a seismic upgrade in output from those two players. I can't remember exactly what it was, but the minutes per goal, it was like Ivan Toney's scoring a goal like 70 minutes more regularly. It takes Eddie Nketiah an extra 70 minutes for one more goal, and the assists, it's like an extra 140 minutes or something like that. So that's crazy. And then you compare Eddie Nketiah to Gabriel Jesus. This is just last season, but again, Nketiah played more games, slightly fewer minutes, but more games, far fewer goals, far fewer assists, and he just doesn't contribute as much. And if you want to upgrade, quite simply, Eddie Nketiah has to be the one that leaves, in my opinion. The only other possible option is Reiss Nelson, but he just signed a new contract, and I feel like he offers something very different. So whether you're looking at bringing in Neto, Ivan Toney, we all know that we're probably going to bring in another attacking player at least in January. Who has to make way? Well, it's probably Eddie Nketiah. And the next thing I wanted to look at, and why Smith-Rowe and Nketiah become a problem, is that I can't get away from the fact that our squad is still very, very bloated. If you take these 4 players, Cedric, Jorginho, Elneny and Tierney, who, Elneny, Cedric and Jorginho are all out of contract next summer. Kieran Tierney on loan, injured again, looks like he's definitely going to move next summer. Even if you take these 4 players out of the squad, we're still at a point where we don't have enough matchday squad spaces for the players that we already have, let alone bringing in players. So if you look at, let's say our best starting 11 is Raya, the back 4 of White, Saliba, Gabriel Zinchenko, midfield of Rice, Partey, Ødegaard, and an attack of Martinelli, Jesus and Saka. I think that's our best 11. It doesn't matter what you think the best 11 is, but let's say it's that. In a Premier League matchday squad, you have 9 substitutes. So one of them's Raya or Ramsdale. You've then got, when fit, Timber, Tomiyasu, Kivior, Havertz, Fabio Vieira, Trossard, Nketiah, Reiss Nelson. So already within that, you've run out of room. You haven't got room for Emile Smith-Rowe. You haven't got room for any of these. You haven't got room for any academy players, whether you're talking about bringing back Patino, whether you're talking about Ethan Nwaneri coming through, Miles Lewis-Skelly coming through, and you've got no room for signings. So let's say you now want to bring in one attacking signing. Okay, one of the attacking players needs to drop out. Who's that? In my opinion, it's Eddie Nketiah. Smith-Rowe at that point has already gone. Like, and that's only if you want to bring in one player. Let's say you want to bring in a wide player and a striker. Someone else at that point even has to go. Reece Nelson, maybe. We're at this point where, like it or loathe it, we've run out of room in the squad. We're not going to get rid of the likes of Fabio Vieira and Kai Havertz because they were signed recently for good money and, you know, their form is good and they've been playing more regularly. So I just look at it and I can't find a way where, at least by next summer, Eddie Nketiah and Smith-Rowe are still at the club, probably Reece Nelson as well. And people will look at it and they'll say, well, you know, in the summer we spoke so highly of Emile Smith-Rowe. That's probably to keep his value up, right? If in the summer we'd kind of not really made any headway with Smith-Rowe and it sounded like he wanted to leave, then come January, you know, you'd get far less money for him. So it's a shame. It's a big shame. But ultimately, I don't see a way around it. And we can't have videos like we had yesterday where we talk about Neto and we talk about Tony and we talk about Antonio Nusa and any other potential player. You can't make those videos without making another video where you talk about who has to make way. That's just the brutal reality of it. And actually, those moves help us in terms of FFP. You know, we haven't sold players for big money. Balogun. That's pretty much it. Balogun and Xhaka in recent times. So we have to start moving players on for good money. And those are two of the ones that I think you have to start with Smith-Rowe and Nketiah. It's painful. They're academy graduates. It sucks. It does suck. But, I mean, look, if you think there's a way out of it that doesn't involve getting rid of them, let me know in the comments. But that's what it is. So a bit of almost a downbeat video, thinking about the departure of those two. But that's the brutal reality if you want to compete at the very top. If you enjoyed the video, like I said, please do smash a like on it. Please do subscribe if you're new. And I will catch you tomorrow. Goodbye.